What's up, everyone? My name is Mistic, and welcome to Mr. X. Today I'm reacting to another video by, Trust Me Bro, Why It Sucked to Be a Plague Doctor. I really don't know much about plague doctors or the Black Plague, so let's see what it was like, I guess, and why it sucked. I mean, obviously it would suck. You're dealing with, like, dead and sick people, but yeah.
You wake up to the sound of a horse-drawn buggy galloping down a cobblestone road. This is a familiar sound. Every morning,
Hey,
the coroners come and
are you
collect all of
awake?
the dead and take them to a burn pile. Today's pile
Very
is
familiar.
particularly large. You take a deep breath and reluctantly get out of bed.
Mhm.
Today is like any other. You skip breakfast and get straight to work because there is no time to spare. You
Mhm.
start by getting dressed. You open your closet and are met with your alter ego, the plague doctor, and for many, the last thing
Amazing
they see
outfit.
before death. You begin by
Mhm.
putting on long undergarments tucked into each other, long johns tucked into socks, undershirt tucked into pants, anything to keep out the bad air. Next,
Mhm.
you put on a thick, ankle-length overcoat, which has been sealed with animal fat and pleasantly scented wax to prevent any air from seeping in. Next, you put on your boots and gloves, making sure they maintain a tight seal. Following that, you put on your bird-like beak mask. Every morning, you empty the beak and refill it. This beak serves a very important purpose. It was believed that the spread of the plague was caused by bad air, particularly bad smells. Therefore, the thought was if you could maintain good smells near your nose, you would be protected. The beak had two
Mhm.
nostrils at the very end of it and was filled with herbs and spices, particularly lavender. The freshly
Ooh.
stuffed beak served as a perfect filtration system, or so
Mhm.
they thought. The beak is tightly fastened to your face, making sure to prevent any ways for bad air to leak in. Finally, you put
Mhm.
on your leather hat and grab your cane, which will be proving very useful very shortly. Now that you're fully equipped, you grab your medical tool bag and you're out the door. You live in an area that's relatively untouched by the plague, at least comparatively
Mm.
speaking, but you work day in and day out in the most devastated parts. Plague doctors were hired by cities to help provide services to low-income citizens who weren't able to pay for proper care, and unfortunately, that typically meant you were dealing with the worst cases possible. The slummish
Mhm.
conditions of these poverty-stricken neighborhoods allowed disease to run wild and destroy almost everything in its path. You
Mhm.
approach your first
Not
house
the
call,
air.
checking up on a patient you visited the day before. Before you could even get to this person's door, you are met with a disgruntled and obviously sickly person, desperate for
Hi.
answers and help. This is where one of the use cases of this cane comes in. Tensions were reasonably high, and
Are you gonna hit
unfortunately
them?
for many people, proper care was simply not an option. People were desperate to get any time or attention they could from the plague doctors, even if that meant assaulting them. It sounds counterintuitive, but people were
Yeah.
desperate. You are literally beating people off with a stick to maintain a distance between yourself and people who will likely be dead within the next few days. You enter the residence of your first house call and things are looking grim. Your patient has buboes all over their neck, arms, and legs. These buboes are the inflammation of the lymph nodes, causing large blood and pus-filled boils to appear all over the patient's body. These painful buboes also burst and leave open, oozing wounds. You use your cane again for its second purpose, checking if your patient is even alive. You maintain your distance and nudge them a few times. In this case, your patient wakes up, but only barely. Almost all of the information available is anecdotal, and your tool bag
Mhm.
is light and unequipped. For this specific patient, you recommend bloodletting. You open a jar of leeches and start placing the
Ugh.
leeches on the buboes to help drain them. As these leeches are applied, you
Is
hand
any
this
of
patient a
this
bouquet of
actually
flowers to allow
good?
them to smell good air. After a roughly 30-minute treatment, you let them know that you don't believe they'll be alive by morning. In this case, you do take a will and last testament from them, something that you'll be able to provide to any of their living family. You pack up
Mhm.
your things and you're back onto the street. It's cold, gloomy, and the street is only populated with rats feeding off dead bodies and the smell of death. Although helping people is your only goal, typically even the sight of you was a bad omen. Many people only saw plague doctors days before death, and therefore associated seeing you with dying in the near future. On your walks between house calls, you always ponder on what could be causing such a disease. You know this isn't the first plague, not by a long shot.
It's
From the
not?
plague of Justinian to the Black Death that eliminated
Mm.
almost a third of Europe, to now, with the resurgence of the plague in Venice, we still have very limited information about what is happening. At this point, the
Mhm.
government has tried quarantining the sick and those who even appear to potentially be sick, putting them on a remote island and burning all of their earthly belongings to make sure that there is nothing left to spread the disease. It seems like every day the death count only rises and rises, and those who become infected by the disease live a horrible last few days. The
I
disease
can
starts
only
with the appearance of these
imagine.
buboes, which is typically a mark of death. These buboes multiply in numbers and grow in size, sometimes getting as large as an apple. Hours or potentially even days later, you are met with an extreme fever and a throat-scratching cough. Your body rejects all foods and liquids, and sometimes dehydration would kill you before the plague could. This disease can be so fast-acting that someone can go to bed feeling relatively fine and not wake up in the morning. Before germ theory was ever a thing, miasma theory was the prominent scholarly belief. The theory was simple and refers to the bad air I mentioned earlier. The miasma theory stated that diseases such as the plague were spread through bad air or night air or essentially noxious gas, meaning that it was the smell that carried the disease and nothing else, which is why the plague doctors kept good smells, perfumes, and spices and herbs in their mask, as the good smells would counteract the bad smells, which unfortunately wasn't extremely effective. It's also for this reason why your thick coat is covered in animal fats and scented wax. You arrive at your next house call, but this patient is no longer with you. But you knew that going into it. You're not treating this person, you're performing an autopsy. On top of treating people, witnessing and writing wills and testaments, plague doctors also performed autopsies when requested to collect information about cause of death and the disease itself. In this case, you're documenting the body of this victim and checking their insides to see what exactly was affected by the plague. This is one of the most dangerous actions for plague doctors, as this presents them with the highest opportunity to get infected bodily fluids on their clothing and on their skin, which could easily infect and kill the doctor. Those who became infected with the plague died within 3 to 8 days, and the death rate of the plague was 80%, meaning that this disease for most people was a death sentence. The deadliness of this disease was actually part of its downfall, as although it was spread through unhygienic, tightly packed urban areas, due to the fact that it killed so quickly, it got to a point where it started running out of victims and started killing itself off as it was unable to find and spread itself to other hosts. Near the end of the plague, people began to understand that transmission occurred when people were in contact with each other. Therefore, quarantining and maintaining distance from others became much more popular. It wasn't known at the time, but the biggest spread of the disease was through infected fleas that lived on rats that also populated these urban areas heavily. The word quarantine actually comes from the word quarantino, which means 40 days in Italian. This is because when boats would dock at the ports of Italy, they would make these sailors stay on their boat for 40 days to ensure that they were not bringing any disease with them. It's interesting to retrospectively look back at the practices of the time, but unfortunately, when you're in the middle of the situation, tensions were high and information was limited. Some people believe that this plague was a punishment from God, and people took this belief into their own hands and began killing people that they thought to be sinful to help end the plague early by removing the sinful from this world. The psyche of the general population was at an all-time low. When you wake up every day to bodies being carried in front of your house, being brought to burn piles, seeing people covered in awful lumps all over their body, and having a third of your family pass away overnight, you simply can't maintain a normal mind. As a doctor and hired professional, you do your best, but even for you, it's not easy. You finish your day, getting home late, making yourself a meal and resting, as you have another busy day tomorrow, doing all the same things over and over again, hoping that the number of deaths doesn't increase too much, and hoping that you didn't get infected yourself. This same cycle continues over the next years and years until signs of hope start to glimmer, with so many people dying that it's simply harder for the disease to spread. With increased quarantine measures and increased awareness about hygiene in the mind of the population, it appears that the disease is starting to lift and potentially things are starting to look better. You may be out of the job, but you're completely happy about that because your job requires hell, and you'd rather be retired in heaven than employed in hell. The government relieves you from your duties and you go back to your home in the countryside, finally reconnecting with your wife and children after years of no contact, because even sending a letter could potentially spread the disease, as bad air could be trapped in the envelope. You arrive in the countryside to a wife who's breaking down at the sight of you and kids who barely recognize you. You all share a pleasant moment and then go inside. Your wife prepares you a beautiful meal for your return, and your children just want to know who you are and where their dad has been. You have the best day that you've ever had in your life, and you feel that maybe this endless nightmare is over. You tuck your young children into bed for the first time in years, and before going to bed yourself, you go to the washroom. And by washroom, I mean you step outside to take a leak. You unzip your pants and urinate into the vegetable garden you didn't realize your wife planted there. You give yourself a few shakes and realize something on your leg. It's a small lump on your inner groin. It's unfortunately something you're familiar with. And now the timer is ticking.
Oh no. poor plague doctor. I I knew the plague and stuff was bad, but damn, I do not remember learning all that in school. Like all the bumps in the 3 4 day time limit. But yeah, I figured being a plague doctor would suck. But let me know what to watch next, and until next time, bye bye.